Ladies and gentlemen, it's Wednesday, and you know what that means. That means it's George and George coming at you with all kinds of interesting topics for you to think about, maybe laugh at, and hopefully participate in. Benjamin C. George, how are you doing, my friend?
Another day in paradise, brother. How about yourself?
You know what? I'm happy to be here. It's the middle of the week, and I'm always looking forward to these conversations. So
Me as well.
I have found myself revisiting some of what were a series of talks called the Trilogues, and it was with Ralph Abram, Terrence McKenna, and Rupert Sheldrake. And there's just so much interesting ideas put forth in this trilogue, and I was revisiting some of the ideas of Rupert Sheldrake,
So,
and
yeah.
and he had gotten to this idea about evolutionary creativity, and how can the habits of nature evolve? And it just got me thinking, like, is nature does nature have habits? And you start I had to think about that for a while, and I began thinking about, if we look at the cyclical nature of creation, the cyclical nature of evolution, and we look at our own life and the series of patterns that we repeat in our own life. And I think I think we could say that, yeah, if we are a product of this earth, if we don't come into this world, we come out of it, and we have habits, then then nature has habits. What do you think about that?
I think this is kind of where you start to blend into terms, right?
Right.
Because for us, we call it habits. For nature,
Mm.
we call it cycles or epochs or, other associative names. But in essence, it is a habit if you were to look at it at a larger scale. And if you were to zoom out and take the lifespan of it and stretch it out to, billions of years, you could call it habitual, but and then what is a habit? For us, it's something that arrives because of our environments, our nurture, what we're surrounded by. There's the old saying, you're a reflection of the five people you spend the most time with, right?
Yeah.
um, and in that forms a lot into our habits. So that immediate environment, that external environment, combining with our internal environment, is where we kind of form our habits. And you can look at the system of nature in a similar fashion. And it's interesting because you can extrapolate that to, as above so below, and look at us, and then internalize all the machinations and systems inside of us that are doing all these things, that without those cyclical, like our circadian cycles and our tritian cycles and things like this, that influence our cells and our timing and all of that, those are habits in and of themselves, but they allow us to maintain and grow our own habits at a macro level. So I think there's definitely, there's something to be extracted from that. I think whenever we can find the comparison between nature and ourselves, I think there's a lot of value to extract from that, and take a note or two from.
Yeah. I would have to agree. That's well put. And it brings me to another point of the existence of a kind of memory inherent in each organism. You probably, maybe you've heard of this study. It's called, like, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but maybe you can pull me back from the edge if I begin butchering it too much. Um, it's like the hundredth monkey syndrome, and the idea or the thought program was something like there was these islands, and on this one island, each island had similar monkeys, and on one island, one monkey began figuring out how to take a shell and crack it against a rock. And there was a group of scientists that went to one island, and no monkeys on this one island were doing this particular set of behaviors. They went to this other island, and they noticed that this other monkey began doing it. A week later, they went back to the other island, and on that island, every monkey was doing it. So you can make the argument they just didn't see it, but the thought experiment says that once one individual in a species learns something, there's some sort of shared memory or morphogenic field that allows other people to tap into that particular behavior. Have you heard of that? And
Oh
what
yeah,
do you think about that?
Well, we see it in humans too. The first person to break the 4 minute mile, it couldn't be done. But then after that, 100 people did it like it was nothing. And I think we observe this in art and culture just in general. And then if you look at historically, like science inventions, we were talking about black powder on Sunday. That was invented independently around the same time, thousands of miles away. Now, we might not have the full picture of the actual communication systems at that time, and we might be missing a bit of that picture, but we do have modern evidence like the 4 minute mile. And, also, especially when people start talking about something and then all of a sudden you just see it kind of hit the zeitgeist
Yeah.
yeah, we call it going viral, but how much of it is, assisted by our technology, and how much of it is that there's so much concentrated thought on a single idea that it's now kind of perpetuating itself, not by means that we're necessarily used to in how we measure the perpetuation of ideas, but yeah, access. It's been called the Akashic field, right?
Right.
The morphogenic field. There's been names through it from antiquity. So and then in my theory of information, I would call that information, and tapping into those types of ideas is a very probable thing, as we're just kind of a giant transceiver in one perspective.
Yeah, and this gets us to our title, the archaic techniques of ecstasy. It seems to me, whether you're on a salvia trip or whether you are on a high dose psilocybin trip or LSD, or pick your agent of change. For me, it's mostly been the psychedelics, and the best ones usually come after I have somewhat purified my body, whether it's fasting or maintaining a certain type of diet, or Kevin Holt says that he likes to begin his by going to a sweat lodge or some sort of purification. And once you have ingested it, purified, then you seem to reach this plane. It's almost an out of body plane, which may be that morphogenic field, which may be the tapping into the Akashic records, but it's a higher form of yourself, or a higher sense of knowing. And it does seem at times at those states like you're really beginning to receive a different flow of information, a different wavelength, or tapping into something else. And that's, from everything I've read about some of the mystics of antiquity, it seems that that's what they were reaching into when they came back with these great ideas, and then they were able to spread it out and begin implementing this idea. What do you think that is happening today on a even greater level? If we talk about the 4 minute mile and people beginning to do it once they saw it do it seems like so many people are into psychedelics now. Do you think that is perhaps a quickening of this new field, or a quickening of information being distributed?
A quickening. Are we getting into the Highlander stuff here?
It can be only one.
Yeah, it is interesting. There is an uptick, right? Now, how much of that is simply because there's more of us communicating?
Right.
That'd be hard to measure, but at the same time, there does seem to be and we've talked about it in other ways. There's kind of like a spiritual reawakening for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily in any context of religion, but more so in people searching out their own paths. And realizing that the structures that exist today just don't fill that hole, that void inside of all of us, and it leaves something to be wanting. And I think when something's to be wanted, we have this natural inclination to explore. And I think that awakening of that was the enlightenment journey, right? This is the hero's journey. This has been a story retold for as long as we've been retelling stories. And I think we're definitely in an interesting chapter of that story. And I definitely would say, not to rip off Highlander, but there is a quickening of things. There is a rapidity to the uptick in people's thirst for knowledge and desire for answers.
Yeah. I often wonder if the next, if the next 100 years a lot of people think that the that the next frontier is going to be space. And I would agree, but the only question is that outer space or is it inner space? I think that we're able to see a lot of exploration the same way we saw Vasco da Gama and, pick your explorer that exploited but crossed over the seas. There's when we look at the history that I was taught, you look at, and I realized, to everybody listening, I realized the ideas about Columbus, and maybe he's not I get all of it. I get all of the political correctness. However, I'm just saying, as far as people who cross the sea to discover new lands, even though they're not new, the people crossed over these and did all this exploration. It seems like that same spirit of exploration has taken hold in the individual. And there's never been a better chance to find El Dorado than to look within. What do you think about this exploration of the inner?
Well, I think in order for us to truly understand our environment, first you have to understand yourself.
Mm.
Uh, and I think there is I wouldn't say a large contingent, but a small group of people who have realized this and have taken it upon themselves to figure out who they are, and what they want to do in this world. And I would say that back then it was, there was probably similar things, but there was much more restricting factors, right? We have a little bit more freedom when it comes to the ability to travel distances. We have a lot more freedom when it comes to the ability to communicate. And I think those lend themselves to, fostering these movements. And I think we are in the midst of, we're seeing a new movement, a new evolution of ideas, and I think that's very much reflective of the past 50 some years of people really kind of exploring these internal paths, because you have to figure, before the hippie thing blew up in the 60s, right? You would be hard pressed to find any sort of psychedelic experience. I mean, you would have to travel very far and wide and communicate with the right people in order to find a shaman or somebody who was trained and knowledgeable in these things. And then, we took the power of the masses and said, hey, let's just everybody start partying, and let's see where the needle goes here. And so, it went from that, and there was legitimate research, right? There was a lot of people who wanted to use it for prison reform and psychological stuff and things like that. The story of how and why those things are illegal is an interesting bit of history. And, again, it usually falls back down to the money, sadly. So we don't need to repeat that story too much. but
Yeah.
there, but there is definitely um, a movement to figure out what this is, what a human being is, more specifically who you are.
Yeah. It's After hearing you say that, it makes me continue to go down this idea of inner space travel. And the same way, for most people who have traveled out of their hometown into a foreign country, one common thread that people find is they learn so much about themselves and where they're from, maybe more so than where they're going to, because you're faced with yourself as the stranger. You're faced with yourself being a strange man in a strange, or a strange woman in a strange place. And it's so fascinating to me to think that I can have that same revelation with a huge dose of psilocybin. The more that I take time to, have these giant trips and start thinking about myself, I feel like I emerge into a different world, or at least a different idea of the world I'm in. And I feel like I see people different. I feel like I see myself different if I'm doing the real work and I'm integrating the trip, if I'm integrating what happened to me and taking time to write in my journal and taking time to think about the issues prior and before and after, and then coming to a conclusion of like, yeah, I was right on there, or you know what, I need to rethink that. But it's so fascinating that that you can have these same experiences traveling, whether you're just traveling inward or traveling outward. And I wish, I kind of feel like that's what is going on right now with the demographics in our society. It seems like there are so many people on the cusp of the mortality experience that they could all benefit from a bit of an inner trip. It's kind of a tangent there, but what do you think?
I think yes, on the just the big picture perspective. Again, I think the devil's in the details, right?
Yeah.
And once we get down to the brass tacks, some of those people, in fact, I'd say probably a lot of people these days aren't ready to look in the black hole. They're not ready to walk across the abyss. Because they're attached to everything that they're attached to in this world, and those attachments are very, very powerful in keeping people, definitely not happy, but placated enough to the point where they don't seek exploration, they don't question, right? And that's not necessarily just like a singular thing. It could be just the total environment that they were thrust into. They might not have even had an opportunity to try to develop anything that would allow them to make a choice to go down a different path. So I think when we look at it from the nuance perspective, I think they could probably all benefit, but how would you reach all those people the appropriate way? Because if all of a sudden you just drove down the street and started throwing bags of mushrooms at people and saying, eat those right now, and then you monitored everything, I don't think you would get the result that you were kind of looking for. I think you would get a bit more chaos.
Yeah. I sometimes I go down the idea, and I think a lot of people have had this idea. Old hippies or scientists or just crazy people have this idea that, man, if you could just get enough people to be on psychedelics, you could change the world. But the more that I do psychedelics, the more I realize it's not for everybody. And I'm not saying that the handful of us here are like chosen people or anything like that, but
Well,
there's
I
a
think
level. Please.
an important part of that is it could be for everybody, but it's not for everybody.
What do you mean it could be for everybody?
Well, I think, just like we were talking about, those underlying circumstances, those nuances of culture, society, where location in the world, those are very prohibitive in many instances. However, if somebody were to extricate themselves from that, which many people do, right? You meet tons of people that are just like, yeah, I was done. I packed up everything and I left. And, we both did that ourselves. So, people do just kind of, they're like, okay, I'm going to go. And I think when you're willing to make that choice is when you're ready to start to proceed down that path.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess it's when you're ready to begin the journey, the initiation begins, or somewhere along that lines. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, who is it for anyone to say when it's someone else's time to start? I mean, I guess that's
Right.
everybody's, but you're born with that, hey, I don't want to start yet, or I'm not ready to start, or for
Or
whatever
you,
reason.
or you just don't even know you have the choice to.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that would be a good goal, is to show people they have a choice. That might be one of the greatest things anybody could ever do, is to show you have a choice of something.
That's why I wrote my book, really.
Yeah.
To give the proper perspective for somebody to make the self-realization that they have the ability to of a free choice in this world. Now, it's not to say that choices are not without consequences, right? But at the same time, understanding that you actually have a choice. There are many people who, in not just in the psychedelic aspect or the relationship aspect or where they are in the world, but in all of these aspects, some people just don't even realize they have the choice to change something, because they've been told that this is the way it is. It's an absolute. You can't change this. This is the way it's going to be. And when people have that perspective, well, what's the point of questioning it if everybody around you has repeated the same thing and nobody's given you any idea that you can actually move beyond those non-absolutes that people proclaim as absolute.
Yeah, that one in this diagram, I never thought about it until you just said this right now, but I think you do a good job of showing that not making a choice is still making a choice.
Right.
And when you get into, by the way, for everybody listening, the book's called No Absolutes. And you can see some of the infographics right here. It's so, like I said, I think one of the greatest gifts you could give people is letting them know that they have a choice, and that maybe they're not conscious of it, but every day they're making a choice not to make a choice, or they're making a choice to not know, or they're making a choice to not walk a little bit closer to that which drives them to passion, and so doing that is liberating, it's freeing. And I hope that we're on the cusp of making that something for people to see. But I wanted to bring up this infographic again right here. So the infinite potential, every conceivable possibilities. So that is what surrounds us. Is that fair to say? All the balls and the spheres on top, that is exactly what is around us at all times.
Exactly. Yep. An infinite sea of potentiality, every single conceivable possibility that might exist. And as we make the choice, even if it's, even if we're not thinking we're making a choice, but by taking a left or a right, you make a choice. And by taking those motions, those are impacting the future generations of choices. And they're making them more and more probable. And that's that environment, experience, perspective, thoughts, and actions. And then you get to as the funnel decreases, you get to a point of the most potential possibilities, the most likely possibilities that you're going to face and encounter. And then as you're making your choices, and everything around us is in motion, in moving and making choices, that confluence of choice reflects back to us as our perceived reality.
It's like I said, for those who are watching, you should check out the book, because there's so many cool graphics like this. I'm almost thinking now, because I've read it a couple of times, and now I'm almost thinking, like, I wonder if we could put a number on, like, is there some sort of mathematical equation we could put, like, environment times experience? Like, do you think that one of those factors, or one of those particular environment, experience, perspective, thought, do you think that one of those weighs more than the other, or are they all connected?
Well, they're all gonna be connected, and the weight of them is going to be it's going to be a fluid thing.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, if you're on the edge of a cliff and there's a couple slippery rocks, your environment is very, very much a part of the equation of the outcome. If you're just walking down the street, your thoughts and actions are going to be much more weighted in the outcome of what you're going to experience in reality. So I think it's definitely going to be due to the moment in time. It's going to be a much more fluid thing. However, putting math on it. So I'm writing an addendum to my initial paper, which is the math part of it, and I've been trying to write it for years because I'm not a mathematician. I can do the math, and I'm getting better at doing harder math. But putting the right math on it has been just a process for me. So I'm working on that part of the paper now. Um, you know, just a rough number, a couple rough numbers from the paper. The information moves at about 20,000 times the speed of light by my initial calculations. This kind of explains the thing when we have like quantum entanglement, right? So if you have quantum entanglement, you can have two different, and you could have the same particle. You could have a photon and a photon, or you can even have a photon and an electron. And these can be entangled over vast distances so that when you do something to one of them, it seems to us instantaneously from a measurable perspective that the exact same thing happens to the other, despite that distance. And so when I get into the information theory type stuff, this is more, that's the calculation of how fast that information is actually traveling. So I've started to wrap some numbers around these things. And I think there's value in doing that. And that's why I've spent a lot of time trying to do it. But if anybody's a mathematician and wants to kick around some fun stuff, let me know.
Yeah, that kind of gets us back to what we were talking about earlier about the 100th monkey syndrome, or
Exactly.
the all of a sudden, because it's happened here, now it can happen here because it has gone through the formality of actually happening. Thus, it can happen again over here, where you move away from this theoretical idea to something that's actually happened.
Right.
I think this is good at waking people up, or allowing people to, maybe not so much waking up as it is getting people to see the situation they're in from a different perspective.
It's all about perspective.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Because
Appearance and sorry, go ahead.
oh well, you'd mentioned, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the ability to walk in somebody else's shoes.
Yes.
You know, that's and that's not even, doesn't have to be a physical somebody else. It can just be you from a detached perspective. That's the ability to walk in somebody else's shoes, because now you're seeing somebody walk in your shoes and you're observing it as you would observe, somebody walking down the street, and get allowing your mind to be able to create those perspectives, and then taking the time to really sit with those and analyze them and reflect upon them. That opens us up to just new possibilities and new choices, new ways to deal with emotional trauma, new ways to deal with relationships, and because now you're not just thinking I. You have the perspective of, yeah, it's us and me, and I all of a sudden kind of goes away. And I think that's a lot of the power, back to the psychedelic that we've been talking about, is when you get the ability to look in the black mirror, walk across the abyss, you lose a lot of that I, right? That's what people typically refer to as ego death. And you see a different perspective, and that perspective is the interconnectivity of all things, and that's a powerful perspective, because now you're just not there, a lone butterfly in the wind. Now you realize, by flapping your wings, you very well may create the tornado in 1,000 miles away.
Yeah, it's such a great way to begin changing the way you see the world. It's, as I'm sitting here, I'm looking at my bookcase, or when you go outside, you're at the mall, you see all these people. But what those two things have in common is that the answer to the problem you're having surrounds you. If you find yourself in a situation that seems as if it is unsurmountable, all you need to do is talk to your neighbor. All you need to do is look at the books on your bookcase. Like, the answer to your problem has been not only solved, but has been lived out and attempted to be solved in so many ways that it's staring at you. It's right next to you. The answer is right next to you if you're willing to look for it or do a little bit of investigative work. And I think that comes from seeing yourself in other people, whether it's somebody at the mall, or it is, Gore Vidal, or some best-selling author. The answer's right there. And especially if we look at the theory of another theory of information that says you can't really come up with a new idea, but you can rearrange the parts of all old ideas and thus come up with a new product just by rearranging the ideas or your structure of language. For instance, the dog bit Johnny, or Johnny bit the dog. I just changed around the subject right there, but those two radical meanings, especially if you're Johnny. And so I think that if people can begin to see the way they use their language, they can begin to see their environments, they can begin to learn from their past experience, change their perspective, and that will lead to you changing your actions, and it'll lead to better choices and a better reality. I'm going to move on to this next slide here, because I think that there's a lot more we can get here. These ones are, I wish that I blew them up a little bigger.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have talked a little bit about this one.
We've covered that one, yeah.
I just want to go over it one more time right here, because I have come to a conclusion. For me, the ocean has always been this place that it is some like a place of refuge.
Mm-hmm.
It can be chaotic, and it can be, sometimes the fear of death is put in you when you're out there.
It's a wonderful metaphor for life.
Yeah, it really is. Mm-hmm. It really is. Why don't you tell us again a little bit about this slide?
This is kind of just taking that funnel perspective and putting it into something that might be a little bit more relatable. It's because everybody, or at least a good chunk of people, have sat down and watched the waves rolling off the ocean. And you can see how when the wave crashes, it pushes into the next wave and the next wave and the next wave, and you can see how it's all interconnected. You can see that actually play out right in front of your eyes. And so, having this kind of visceral connection to things, I find is a better way to explain, metaphors, and especially when you're trying to get, a really comprehensive topic like, information down into something that's digestible. And so this is taking that funnel and putting it into kind of that picture format where it's, just the unfolding of reality is those concurrent waves that are always impacting the next wave and the next wave and the next wave.
What I really like about this one too is it gives you an idea of the cyclical nature of reality and how we're all part of something bigger, even though we feel as if we're individuals. I think it was Alan Watts who says that every human is like a wave on the ocean, growing, cresting, and then breaking, and but you're still made up of the same body that makes up all of us. And if you can put yourself in that perspective, it becomes a lot easier to relate, not only to your own problems, but to relate to the problems of other people. And in doing so, it allows you to see yourself as other people. When you know that you're part of the same body, when you know that you may not have the exact same problems, but you're going through the same areas, be it your 40s or your 20s or a breakup or a childbirth, like you're going through areas that people have gone before. It just makes it so less daunting and kind of allows you to understand that you can seek out help, or you're going to get through it one way or the other. Either you're going to crest through it or you're going to break through it. But I really, and this is one of the first times I've seen it put this way. So that's one way that it really made me excited about it.
And, there's a few more things, like if you really start to delve on these things, and if you start to look at, well, why do waves form, right? And then, it's a reflection of the overall system. It's the pressure in the air. It's the density of the water. It's the density of the air. It's the movement of the winds. It's the warming and the cooling of different spots in the ocean. And so you can start to then take that metaphor and expand it out, and you can see where the correlations are between how our environments do affect our choices and thereby our reality. And, all of the different nuances of what goes into that particular moment. And, when we can start to, again, take ourselves out of this eye and look at the world in these different types of metaphorical symbology, like we've talked about a lot, right? And that's where, I think we can actually help with understanding a lot more, because a lot of people have heard the words, but once you can put yourself in the situation, you get a visceral change. You can feel it. You can feel the perspective shift, because all of a sudden, when you look at something, you're looking at it through a shifted eyesight. Even that internal vision, and all of a sudden, it makes more sense. You go, oh, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense if I think about it that way, when I'm not worried about me and what's going to happen for me and all the eyes along the way. Now you can look at it as that big interconnected thing. I think this goes a lot to kind of illustrate that, there is no us and them, right? That's never been the case. It's just a whole sea of us.
Yeah. It's profound to me too, to think, depending on who you ask, it's either all waves or all particles. But when another one, or maybe it just depends who we're lying to. I'm not sure. But it brings me back to the idea of a psychedelic trip. Like, at least for psilocybin, like, it comes in waves. Like, you ride this crest up, and you're like, wow, and then it kind of backs off, and then you ride it back up, and then it backs off again, and it just the whole nature of reality seems we can learn so much from the wave form if we're willing to just step back and look at it like that. Like, how many times in your life have you just, man, things are getting better and better and better, and then you crash, like, oh man, I can't believe I thought that, or for you start a business and things are going well, and then you get to this point where like, should I really do that? Maybe not. And I think if you can see your life like that, it
It's
allows.
possible.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It comes in waves.
Right.
Whether it's
And those waves, when you think about them, that's what we're talking about when we talk about the cyclical and helical nature
yeah,
of things
yeah,
too. That's a waveform. That's the ebb and the flow. That's the crest and the trough, right? And you know, we don't have to look too far to find a great deal of evidence that really supports this. I mentioned it earlier, we have a 24-hour circadian rhythm in our body. Everybody knows what it's like to get tired, right?
yep.
But we have 90-minute ultradian rhythms in our body that do a lot of other things during the day that really, and you'll notice you can work hard for 90 minutes and then you'll feel it. It'll start to slag on a little bit. Or, you can get a good solid workout in for an hour and a half, but you start to push it to an hour and 45 too, you get really tired really fast. It's because there's these waves, there's these ultradian cycles in our body. And, external to us, there's just nature's replete with these, right? We see it in the seasons, we see it through the growing cycles, we see it through fruiting cycles, we see it through all different, all different levels of nature that we peer at. And putting that all into a larger picture of how you operate in the larger, grander scale of things, I think allows somebody a lot of freedom, especially when it comes to their choice. Because now you understand that there is inevitable flow, there is these things, and now you can see those aspects in your life for what they are, and you can act accordingly.
Yeah, it makes me think. Throughout my life, I've known a few people that have committed suicide or attempted to commit suicide, and I think that stems from, it's. I once heard it say that it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And for those of us who may suffer from like manic depressive or some sort of quote unquote mental disorder, or maybe just a glitch, or maybe we get caught up in something. It doesn't have to necessarily be a disorder, but I think looking at life through this particular metaphor does a lot to clean out some of those blockages. Like if hey, sometimes I'm going to be at the top, sometimes I'm going to be at the bottom. Sometimes I can conquer anything. Sometimes I'm going to get held underwater by a riptide. And I think if you can begin seeing yourself as part of the whole, whether it is the ocean, whether it is the infinite sea of possibilities, whether it's a waveform, I think it goes a long way to bring someone back in the fold from this area of isolation. And like that's another part of the book, No Absolutes, that I thought that may not be discussed wholeheartedly in there, but I think it does a good job at explaining, because it is like a holistic approach of unifying and bringing together. Just the images alone do a really good job at that. And it
Thanks.
yeah. Was that something you had in mind when you wrote it, or?
Yeah, it could have been a 200-page book, but I was like, I don't want to write a 200-page book for one. For two, it was also, I wanted to attempt to distill this information down to something that could be digestible in a day, but you're still thinking about it and talking about it and contemplating the different aspects of it a year later, because there is so much involved in that. And so the idea was to paint that framework and then allow people to build around their own structure around it. And in doing so, you explore these different concepts. You'll end up exploring these axioms, like as above, so below, even when you're not aware of it, right? So you don't have to be taught these things. You don't have to be taught the philosophical foundations or the scientific foundations. It gives you the framework to take the essence of of all of that and then build your own structure on it. And so the intent there was to open up the conversation essentially, but if nothing else, provide a framework for somebody to at least look at life just a little bit different.
Yeah. Is that, let me, have you used, it seems to me like the idea of giving an idea or presenting the framework for an idea, sort of a loosely based set of rules to people, and then allowing them to work with those tools, usually provides the best structure, the best framework for people to do it. Because then you have your sense of, hey, I built this. You have your sense of, I used my imagination to come up with using this basic framework right here. Is that a strategy that you've used as an entrepreneur throughout your life?
Absolutely. Especially, I work with people. I don't work for, or no one works for me. That's just kind of a rule. And for that exact purpose. At the end of the day, you want, especially if like from a startup perspective, you really want people invested in the idea. Yeah, it
Yeah.
might be a good idea, but still people have to invest their time, their effort, their imagination, their creativity. And that's a lot to ask from people. But if you create the proper framework where people are not just rewarded for that effort, but they're also, they're also thrust in what's the word I'm looking for? Built up, to that level, then their quality of work, all of a sudden you'd be like, the conversation will go from, hey, did that get done, to, hey, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning with a wild idea, and we didn't do this, but I came up with this. What do you think? Heck yeah, because that solves the solution and it gives us something else. That's the kind of conversations you'll start to get when you have people who are invested in a project, in an idea, in a business. And that's what you're trying to foster in any sort of startup environment. But I think, that kind of applies to relationships in general. A lot of relationships are built on, these mechanisms of trust. And but those are so easily invalidated. But if it's a framework of, hey, this is who I am and this is how I operate, and that's what you get back is, hey, this is who I am and this is how I operate. Now we're building something together as well that is, has a solid foundation, as opposed to, by the way, these are the rules. This is how you're going to play this game. Don't deviate. Otherwise, there's consequences. That's not a great relationship for anybody, and that can be at a personal level too. A lot of people bring baggage into relationships and say, hey, this is the rule. And, if you look at it at a larger scale, those things tend not to work out.
Yeah. Why do you think, like, it seems to me that so much of the corporate structure is founded on the authoritarian foundation, and I'm trying to think of some structures that may, like, you could think of the co-op, or you could think
Mhm.
of you could think of some other structures that don't operate on that platform, but it seems like the ones that are the most profitable, and I'm using
That's
profitable from a strictly monetary point of view, seem to be the if the best idea wins and the idea of the top down structure makes the most money, does that mean it's the best idea to make money?
no. It just means that we valued money in such a way that it
Oh
will
yeah.
outpace ideas. So the reason that you have a lot of authoritarian structure in the corporate world is mostly because of the ability to make choices, pivot, and take action. When you have a bureaucracy, even if it's just a few people who all have equal say in something, it's still a bureaucracy. One guy at the top can say, no, this is what we're doing. And as long as that guy's fairly competent, understands the market that they're involved in, understands the metrics, that the data that they have for their business, their app or whatever, they can make decisions that will be profitable in terms of shareholder return. uh, that does not mean the best idea is at the top at all. It just means it was the most effective idea that that person was aware of, or that they gave their time to be aware of, and then executed upon. And when you compare that in the marketplace of being able to compete, uh, but it's changing now. We are seeing that change now. You have individual creators, you have all these people, you have podcasters outpacing CNN, we have all this stuff now. So it is changing now, but historically it had been where because there wasn't a large communication, because there wasn't the ability for us to say, hey, that product sucked, and yeah, it did. Now with the advent of that, now those just being efficient isn't no longer the only standard. You have to have the better ideas. And so I think that's why we're seeing, just in general in industry, a lot of, kind of diffusion from those central power structures and people looking for other opportunities.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's a great way to look at it. It's very easy to get caught up in this world of, oh, poor little me. There's these giant structures and they just only grow by consolidating. And what chance do I have if I'm just this little person? But while it's easy to get caught up in that particular mindset, I think it's more engaging and more rewarding and probably closer to the truth to think about there's never been more opportunity than there is right now, regardless if the waveform is crashing or if it's just cresting. The fact that you are where you are right now means you're positioned perfectly to be at the top of the next round. And if like you said, there's so many creators out there. Like, look at us just going from, just a short month ago to having a somewhat successful series that we got going on here, to people buying your book and learning from your book and being able to put out a message that helps people and can make their lives a little bit better. I am hopeful for the future. And when you look at that, if you just stand back on one level, if you read the news, you would say, oh, well, there's these giant national countries are beginning to fail and the supply chain is breaking down because of greed and corruption and selfishness, which that could be true as far as greed and selfishness. But another way to look at that might be like, wow, here we are as an individual competing with multi-million-dollar corporations. And maybe that's why the supply chain is breaking down, because there's no longer enough. There's too much weight. It's too top heavy. When you have all these people at the bottom that can compete up here, like a podcaster putting up the same numbers as CNN or something like that, you no longer need this behemoth, all this supply chain and all this just weight over here when you can be so much more nimble.
Right. And I think we're seeing that just kind of across the board. The Terra Libre projects have been on that kind of path. And then, there's other people who are talking sustainable communities too, and other people who are buying up hundreds of acres of land to get their family together. We're seeing, the people who are looking around and care about people, care about the world, care about the next generations, being able to actually have something to live on. Those people are looking around saying, hey, you guys, understand maybe what you were trying to do, but it's not working anymore. And I find it fascinating. It's a wonderful time for opportunity. And, to back to the wave analogy, you said, even if, you feel like it's in a trough, but if you stand back and you look at the rest of the ocean, you'll see that there's always a constant undulation of waves and troughs. And so, it's just putting your board in the right direction and catching the right wave.
Yeah. It makes me think what you said too. In our previous conversations, you had mentioned multiple times that, it's not worth, maybe you didn't say it's not worth, but you said something that when I had mentioned many times, these crazy ideas of like, we got to fight the power, man. And every time you've been able to redirect my thought into the idea of, look, George, you become what you fight. So there's no purpose in fighting this people unless you want to become those people. And if you look at the revolutions of the past, it's just this circular structure of, okay, these are the good people, then they get into power, then they become the corrupt people, and then the new people come up, and it is that cycle. And so what it seems to me like what the Terra Libre project and what some other like-minded people are doing is they're just no longer acquiescing to the people in positions of authority. Instead of fighting them, we're just saying like, yeah, that's not a good idea. We're not going to do that. And that seems like it just takes away all the rage. It takes away all the power. It takes away all the authority from people when people are like, yeah, we're not doing that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you can bang your fist all day long. You can stand up on podiums and yell to your heart's content. But at the end of the day, if I say, yeah, me and mine, we don't care. We're just going to go off and do our own thing. Have a good one.
Yeah.
And, by and large, I think we're in a state of the world where that's that can be pulled off. I think this is a very new state of the world, right? Because if we were to try to go off and do this, say 100 years ago, you'd probably end up with a militia at your at your property or something along those lines. Uh, you know, because there's all sorts of nasty words that are used to describe such things if you look at them in certain contexts. But at the end of the day, people are awakening to the idea that they don't want to live in such an environment. And what are their options? Well, violence seems to be the first option, even if that's just verbal violence or getting angry about it, because that's always humans' first option. But there are other solutions, and typically the one that seems to me to work out the best is just radical noncompliance. Like, you guys can go ahead and do what you do. I'm not even going to care. I'm not even going to speak bad about what you do, but I'm just going to go off and do what I'm going to do. Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's such a better way to spend your energy and your time and your life,
Well,
rather than trying.
And then you open up. Now you have time for creativity again. Now you have time for an imagination again. Now you have time to rededicate to your family, to your friends, to your relationships. Because why? You're not constantly stressed and worrying and clicking on the next post and doom scrolling for 3 hours before you have a crappy 5 hours sleep and go repeat the damn process tomorrow. You get a lot of time back when you remove yourself from these things, when you detach from those mechanisms, those narratives. And that's the real power underlying that. Is once you get to that point, you realize you get all of your time back. And what's the thing? You can't buy more time. It's the one thing we haven't really figured out how to buy. Not to say it's not feasible, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. It's, when you put it like that, it seems like that is the one thing everybody is trying to get from other people. It's time. Hey, you come work for me, or let me give you this. I'll trade you this handful of dimes for your entire day. And hey, put your kids over there. It costs more money, but that's a good place for them to be while you're at work trying to make more money. And then we'll send your parents to this home over here.
Yeah, and then somebody's compromised and they took 5 less cents. So now I'm going to go use that guy. So what are you going to do? Well, I guess I'll take 5 less cents.
Yeah.
Or other options. But and then all of a sudden you're just you have no time left. And then it's sad to see people who wake up at 60, 70 years old and say, what the hell did I do with my life?
Yeah.
I worked for GM for 45 years. Okay.
Nice watch.
Yeah, exactly. Nice watch. And then there's I've met quite a few of those people. And I've even met a few of them who realized that, and then they were like, well, hell, I'm going to go have some adventures now. And I've met the people who are 76 years old, and they're like, oh yeah, I retired at 60 and I realized my life sucked, so here I am, I'm backpacking through the Amazon.
Yeah.
Awesome. But unfortunately, I don't think if you were to ask any single one of them, would you like to do it earlier, I think you're going to get a resounding yes. And so it's unfortunate that it happens so late. But yeah, that is a story that is probably more and more common as the days go by.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing to wake up one day and wonder where the hell you've been, what the hell you've been doing. And it's easy to go through life and live by somebody else's rules. It's easy to go through life and live someone else's dream. And it's easy to go through life wishing that you had more. But if in life you do what is easy, your life will be hard. And so it takes courage. It takes a leap of faith to just stretch out on your own, and it's hard, and I can understand why people don't want to do it, but I believe wholeheartedly that my life and the life of those I love will be better if I'm willing to believe in myself and take a chance. And I I get it. Like, you need money. You need to pay the bills. You need to buy food. And if you have a family, you need to provide for them. But, the question I always end up asking myself is, where do I love the person I am? Does my wife and my kid going to grow up and be better people because of the decisions I made? Or am I just wasting my time? Or am I making the most of it? And, I sometimes I wake up after 4 or 5 hours, like a pounding headache, like, what the fuck am I doing? What am I doing? This is not making any sense. But those times are rare compared to once I get in my day, once I start talking to interesting people, or once I go out for a walk, or once I get my bearings straight, I realize that I'm making a difference. I'm making an impact, and I'm better because of it. And my wife and my kids see it, and they're proud, and I'm proud. And all of a sudden I get to talk to you, and I see the book you wrote, and I start hearing about, hey, George, I drew this in a wave form, or hey, George, here's the there's different possibilities that create choice. And it seems like the more I pour myself into the day, the more I pour myself into the ideas and the thoughts that are beautiful, the more that kind of radiates back to me. And the more that I get to be part of this life that I've always wanted, rather than, and the next thing I know, I'm no longer living someone's life. I'm living my life. So
Right. No
it's a
longer the
beautiful thing.
passenger.
Yeah. And it all it takes is jumping in the driver's seat. Like, the car's on autopilot right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to be fair, a lot of people are thrust into all of these structures. Grow up in
Yeah.
religions, they grow up in certain locations in the world, and yeah, it's not an easy thing. It really isn't, and it's harder for other people than some. Sometimes even people who grow up in really great places with a great family, sometimes it's the hardest.
Yeah.
Because there is if it's so great here, then why would you go look anywhere else? But at the same time, that while you are a part of that greatness, you didn't build it. You were just you just got lucky on your location, and you won't find happiness and joy until you go out and you live your own hero's journey. Until you go out and you test your own waters and figure out who you are.
Do you think that is the one thing that kind of pushes people out onto their own, is like tragedy, or it is like this big right hand that nobody saw coming that lays you out? Is that the thing that forces you, or at least smacks you around enough to go and start doing your own thing?
I think it's a hell of a catalyst for a lot of people. I think there's probably other pathways to it, but I would say by and large, most of the time it's due to a trauma, some sort of trauma, some sort of tragedy in your life. Simply because those are the things that do. They smack you in the face out of nowhere, and you're blindsided, and you have to take a second and go, "What's going on?" And you're actually seeing with clear eyes for a moment, and you look around and you go, oh geez, well, this isn't anything I want to do. I don't want to repeat this process. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't like these feelings. Why does this happen? You start to ask those bigger questions, and that definitely kicks many people down the path, I would say. But I'm sure you can get there from other places. Just so happens most of the people I've met haven't come from other places.
Yeah, it reminds me of I think it was in an Alan Watts story or something, where he talks about this couple that's lost in the ghetto somewhere in England or something, and they roll down the window, and they're like, "Hey, buddy, excuse me." And the guy comes over, and they say, "Hey, do you know how to get to this spot over here?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, I know how to get there, but if I were you, I wouldn't start from here." It's so crazy to think of. I always think about that in my life. Like, yeah, I probably shouldn't start from here, but I got to start somewhere, I guess.
Well, that goes back to what we were talking about, giving everybody psychedelics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get there, but I wouldn't start from there, bud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny to me, because when I look at it from that angle, like, I wouldn't this process, this journey I'm on, I definitely wouldn't, if I could choose, I wouldn't have started where I started. That's a horrible starting point, but it really taught me a lot of stuff. So maybe it wasn't that horrible looking back on it.
Well, the other side of that coin is, or that equation is, that you're here.
Yeah.
And who's to say that you would be if you went a different direction?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
I do.
That's the thing where everybody, well, do you have any regrets? Oh no.
Yeah.
No regrets. Definitely no regrets. I would have changed some things maybe if I could go back and say that it wouldn't affect the outcome, but no regrets because here I am today. I've got to do many of the things that I wanted, that I set out to do, and then I've had to refine goals in my life multiple times because I never thought I would reach those lifelong goals, and then I was there, and I was like, well, shit, now what am I going to do? So and there was many misadventures along the way, and I can honestly say I wasn't a great person back in the day, and so there are definitely things where it's like, yeah, I would have preferred not to hurt those people, or that person, or would have preferred not to get involved in that business relationship, or things like that. But still, if I hadn't, I wouldn't have the perspective that I have today.
Yeah, when I look back on those times, on some of the moments I'm not proud of, I start laughing because I realize like I had to be that person in order to be the
Right.
person I am today.
Right.
And
I had to
it's
be a
like,
piece of shit for a little while.
yeah, you had to. You kind of had to, and in one way you could say, oh, well, I'm just taking the heat off myself. But the more that I look at it, I'm like, no,
No,
I had to do that. Otherwise I would have never learned.
and then if you get really serious about it, you can think about it and say, if I didn't have that experience, when I've encountered this choice later on in my life, I know I would have gone a different direction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and if you're serious and honest with yourself, you'll find those pretty damn often in my experience.
Yeah. I think it lends credence to young people going out and just taking the bull by the horns and trying. Like I mean, all of us know, it's like an old trope. A guy turns 50 and gets a Corvette, or goes through this midlife crisis because they hadn't done the things they wish they would have done when they were 20, or they told themselves they were sacrificing now so they didn't have to. But it's, and I'm sure that happens to all of us on some level, but I think the trick is to chase your dreams, no matter how silly or crazy they are, at least on some level, have that dream bucket and push through it. And if it seems crazy, that's probably something that you really want to do. And if it's crazy, then maybe crazy is just another word for passionate. And if you're chasing your craziness, you're chasing your passion.
Right. And I think, you're, even if you don't end up succeeding at that crazy passion, you will find a different passion along the way, and you will grow, and you will know more about yourself than you ever would if you just decided to defer that till later.
Yeah. That's amazing. Benjamin C. George, I love talking to you, my friend. And it's a good time. I really enjoyed the book. And like I said, I keep seeing new things in there. Maybe that's because I'm talking to you so much, and as I get to know you as a person, I get to see more in the book. And I hope that the audience who's following along with us, who's seen some of our interviews, takes a few moments to do that. And I hope that they get to learn a little bit, and I hope they enjoy talking with us. And if you're listening to this right now, we are live, so you can always chime in, or you can reach out to me or Benjamin George at his website. Benjamin, where can people find you? What do you got coming up, and what are you excited about?
BenjaminCGeorge.com for all the projects and all the machinations and misadventures. Definitely starting the new podcast here. Finally got the mic set up, have the new camera thing, almost have it tuned in. So I'll probably be playing around with at least the first couple of like monologues or something like that here in the next week. And then hope to launch the actual full podcast, interview you, George, later on this month. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm excited.
I get to turn the tables.
I'll be in the hot seat over here. Yeah, I'm excited for that. I think that you bring a lot of talent, and you have a lot of amazing ideas, and I'm super stoked to get to be on your podcast and continue to learn and continue to develop the relationship, and hopefully continue to help other people see the world for the beauty that it can be.
Indeed.
So that's what we got, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned for the True Life podcast later this week. We got some interesting guests coming up. We got Dr. Rick Strassman coming up on the 20th, and we have got I'm going to be doing some forays into some people who are using ketamine as a psychedelic medicine to help others get over traumatic injuries. So that's going to be interesting. I need to read up on that a little bit more. So
that's interesting therapy. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you
It
know
seems,
about that? Have you heard about the ketamine as a therapy?
yeah. There, I've heard it from a couple people. One of them was a buddy. He said he went in there, and it was just a little doctor's room, and they gave him a whole bunch of ketamine. He was tripping balls in the doctor's office, and he was like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. But I've actually heard some very promising results, and like I read a couple preprint papers about it, and there's definitely over the statistical averages of people who have felt genuinely helped by the whole process. So I think I think ketamine's an interesting one. I think psilocybin will be, kind of a creme de la creme when it comes to that. And I've just read a paper this morning, actually, about people's ability to reflect on trauma. And it was I don't want to get the numbers wrong. I'm pretty sure it was close to about a 400% increase in someone's ability to reflect on past traumas, as opposed to like a standard antidepressant.
Wow.
And that was like, and then the psilocybin was 8 times over the baseline. So I mean, from it crushed the pharmaceutical option, and what had a massive impact, to the point where people were very, people said, I've never felt this way before, was listed and on the response sheet for like 30% of the participants.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think there's, wonderful. And, back to what we were talking about before, when it comes to, giving it to all the people. Well, that's really the mechanism. If you could foster that environment where there was, somebody who knew what was going on, it was a safe environment, and you could get people into those types of things, I think that would help a lot of people find the path. Their own
Yeah.
path, that is.
Yeah, I agree. I've never done ketamine, so I don't thoroughly know what that experience is like. And have you done it before? I'm familiar with like I've done LSD. I've done some derivatives of like for ACO DMT. I've done the different analogs. I've done psilocybin, but I've never done ketamine, so I'm not sure if is it a psychedelic? Is it something like the White Room, or what goes
It's
on there?
it's a dissociative.
Okay.
So you're able to, and I think that's why they're using it as a therapeutic tool, because you're
Mm,
really able to really just kind of detach yourself from the trauma and just kind of look at it from the outside
mm.
looking in. And I think that's probably what the mechanism that helps many people. Um, yeah, when I was down in Central and South America, that first little stint of my trip, I was just being a digital nomad. And then on my fun time, I was just finding random plants in jungles, and then all sorts of different psychedelics from different people. So I checked off a lot of the boxes along that path, along that journey.
Yeah. What would you consider psilocybin to be? If is ketamine? It's a twofold question. The first part, is ketamine a psychedelic, and if it is a psychedelic, would you consider the other psychedelics to be disassociatives?
um, it has psychedelic qualities. I wouldn't call it like a really psychedelic. It's definitely where you just kind of, you're, some people use it as a party drug. I've never utilized it in such a manner, but most of those people I see just kind of sitting down with trees at some point, or
Just drooling.
just drooling. So I think psilocybin is a different. I think they're all different animals, but I think in terms of just human propensity for help, I would say psilocybin probably has the largest. And I think it has to do with its just how close it is of genetically related to humans, when you're starting to talk other psychedelics, like ergot, that's you're refining that ergot and taking out a lot of the other constituent parts. When you have DMT, you're extracting DMT. When you have a lot of these other things, it's usually an extraction process. Psilocybin is one of those things that's just on every continent on the planet and seems to work well with the human body. There's zero toxicity. I don't think there's an LD50 on it even, because I don't think anybody's ever eaten enough mushrooms to kill themselves. But yeah, so in terms of of medicine, I see psilocybin and mushrooms as probably one of the better paths of to medical help. In terms of the plant.
Yeah, because ketamine, it's a tranquilizer, and it's definitely it's a synthetic tranquilizer. Is that accurate?
Right. I can't recall what it's derived from. It's derived from some substance that was found in nature, similar to like aspirin and bark and things like that. I can't recall what it is off the top of my head, but yeah, we basically synthesize it at this point.
My wife told me I had to make a retraction because I think in our Sunday conversation I had alluded to John Lilly taking copious amounts of ketamine, and she's like, "Way to go, dummy! You think someone's gonna take a lot of tranquilizers and swim with dolphins? They'd probably drown." I was like, "Yeah, you're probably right.
Well,
I probably should rethink that."
Maybe. I've seen, there's different things react differently with people, and there is something to be said about the process in which you engage these things too.
Yeah.
Just like what the psilocybin journey I shared. I typically, by all accounts, you would be drooling on a bed, except I was running around the mountains and singing and having a great old time.
Right.
So I think there's a lot to be said about setting in any sort of environment where you're influencing neural activity.
Yeah, I would agree. I think
that's not even from a psychedelic perspective, right? Like, just every day too.
Well, this gets us back to your book with the funnel graphic, and the environment and action and thoughts. Like, those are all giant. What is that called? What are the pieces of an equation called? They're called
variables.
Yes, those are very important variables that fundamentally change the outcome of any equation. So, yeah. Well, awesome, my friend. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, so we covered it all. We covered a lot today, man. And I will touch base with you here coming up, and we'll see you on Sunday. Let me know if you have any good topics or any good ideas. And thank you to everybody for taking some time to watch this. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye,
all right. Aloha.